When President Richard Nixon stepped foot in Beijing, China in 1972, he made history, establishing a turning point in U.S.-China relations, and marked a thaw in the previously hostile relations between both states. Nixon went to China, hoping that he could safely get American soldiers out of Vietnam, while China sought U.S. protection from the Soviet Union. Much debate was undertaken as to what the U.S.'s policy towards China should be, and how to conduct diplomacy with the People's Republic.
We must recognize that the government of the People's Republic of China and the government of the United States have had great differences. We will have differences in the future. But what we must do is to find a way to see that we can have differences without being enemies in war.
The thaw ultimately proved successful, resulting in friendly relations between the two countries that left a lasting legacy to this day. However, one question remains unanswered. What caused the two countries to have conflict in the first place? Let me take you back to where it all began. By the turn of the 20th century, the world had greatly changed. While the US saw great industrial growth powered by the Reconstruction era and Gilded Age, China was a nightmare come true. For thousands of years, China had been ruled by powerful dynasties, but the last dynasty, the Qing, fell to a combination of internal and external threats in 1911. While foreign imperial powers pressured China into conceding territory, money, and power to them, Emperor Xuantong abdicated, and the Kuomintang, China's Republican Party, took control of the capital. However, most of China was still controlled by local warlords, and the KMT spent more than a decade trying to quell them. China had basically collapsed, and the people suffered through poverty and starvation. Looking for a way out, some thinkers, including future leader Mao Zedong, took inspiration from the revolution in neighboring Russia and set up the Chinese Communist Party, whose goal was to set up Soviets, or communist enclaves, in China. Although the CCP's paramilitary force, the People's Liberation Army, initially cooperated with the KMT, the uneasy alliance ended in 1927 when Chiang Kai-shek became leader of the KMT and began attacking and destroying Soviets, executing hundreds of thousands of communists.
High over the mountains, movie tone flies for the air forces of President Chiang Kai-shek. This is an actual bombing raid, and as we sight the first of the rebel villages, we commence the attack. Chiang Kai-shek is making desperate efforts to unite the various provinces of China.
In 1934, the PLA was almost completely destroyed, but Mao mustered what men he could and retreated from southern China into the north. During the Civil War, Soviet Russia was the CCP's main ally, while the Kuomintang was supported by the United States of America and Germany. In 1937, Japan invaded China, killing hundreds of thousands of people and taking control of the capital. The KMT and CCP decided to pause the Civil War and collaborate against Japan. However, Chiang's nationalist government suffered defeat after defeat, while Mao's PLA engaged in guerrilla warfare against Japan, while quietly mustering strength and popularity. When the Civil War resumed, the tired, weakened nationalists lost large swaths of land to the communists, who eventually won the Civil War. Chiang fled to Taiwan, while Mao proclaimed the People's Republic of China on October 1st, 1949, and allied with the Soviet Union, alienating the US, who, along with their allies, refused to recognize China's new communist government. China and the US even clashed on the battlefield in the Korean War. Mao had good relations with Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. Both were hardline Marxists, and Stalin gave assistance to Mao in the Civil War and in diplomatic affairs. In 1953, Stalin passed away and was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who publicly denounced Stalin and began to de-Stalinize the USSR. De-Stalinization involved renaming cities named after Stalin, relaxing his stringent laws, and removing Stalinists from the government. Mao's China, who idolized Stalin and looked upon him as a hero, perceived Khrushchev's USSR as deviating from the hardline Marxist-Leninist ideology. Mao felt threatened by Khrushchev's reforms and the fact that China's communist neighbors continued to support the Soviets. To top it all off, territorial disputes between the two countries erupted in bloody border clashes in 1969. Mao knew that if he didn't act fast, China could be in serious trouble. Meanwhile, the US was having problems of its own right on China's southern border. They entered the Vietnam War on the side of the South Vietnamese anti-communist regime in 1965. But by the late 60s, the North Vietnamese advanced further, making it clear that the US could not win the war. In 1969, newly elected US President Richard Nixon knew that he needed to end involvement in the war quickly in order to prevent further casualties. He decided that the best way to end the war was to pursue a policy of détente, or thaw, with China and the Soviet Union in order to convince them to stop selling arms to North Vietnam, while the U.S. involvement in South Vietnam ended. However, this issue was highly polarizing. Many American congressmen believed that Communist China should continue to be regarded as an enemy, an issue that was highly debated on the floors of Congress, slowing Nixon's attempts at détente. In 1971, the World Table Tennis Championship occurred in Japan. Both China and the United States sent their teams. This was China's first time in a ping-pong tournament following a 6-year-long absence, and they won several medals. Following the tournament, American player Glenn Cohen missed his bus and boarded China's bus instead. Although most of the Chinese players eyed him suspiciously, one player, Zhuang Zedong, decided to be friendly, giving Cohen a velvet silkscreen, while Cohen returned Zhuang's gesture with a hippie shirt. The Chinese toured Cohen around China, taking him sightseeing to China's historical and cultural sites. After seeing the friendship between Zhuang and Cohen, the U.S. table tennis team requested the Chinese Department of Foreign Affairs to be invited to China, which was initially turned down by Chairman Mao and Premier Zhou Enlai. However, seeing an opportunity to boost U.S.-China relations, Mao agreed. On April 10, 1971, 9 American players, 4 officials, and 2 spouses of the players entered China from British Hong Kong, where they toured the country, tasted China's unique cuisine, and played games together with the Chinese. Seeing the perfect opportunity to establish relations with Beijing, President Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger opened a highly secretive backdoor channel of communications with Beijing. In July 1971, Kissinger secretly visited China while on an official visit to Pakistan, laying the groundwork for Nixon's trip to China. On February 21, 1972, Nixon officially flew to China for a highly publicized state visit, touring Beijing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou.
When I reached the bottom of the steps, therefore, I made a point of extending my hand as I walked toward him. When our hands met, one era ended and another began.
He had a meeting with Mao, while his wife Pat Nixon visited schools, factories, and hospitals. Nixon and Zhou met each other on various occasions throughout the visit, and agreed to work together toward full normalization of relations. Nixon had kept the press with him for most of his visit, positively influencing how Americans initially thought of China.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
Put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Give me a pair of those.
他是不是给我一对啊？
Immediately after Nixon's visit, signs of the thaw began to show. Although China and the U.S. had clashed for decades due to ideological differences and memories of the Korean War, ping-pong diplomacy paved the way for prominent Americans to come to China and establish ties, such as Nixon, Kissinger, and athletes, musicians, and artists. China replied by sending their own cultural and sporting delegations to the U.S. For the next several years, both countries continued to improve and normalize relations, with the U.S. establishing a liaison's office in Beijing and China doing so in Washington. On January 1, 1979, the U.S. announced that it had recognized the People's Republic of China, and new paramount leader of China, Deng Xiaoping, visited the U.S. that month. Various cultural, scientific, and technological exchanges were undertaken by the two countries, and shared issues brought the two countries closer together. Since this historic event, China has been viewed almost unanimously by all administrations as a strategic partner and ally. Historians believe that the increase in Nixon's approval ratings following the summit directly led to his re-election in 1972. The Clinton administration promoted their inclusion in the World Trade Organization, and the G.W. Bush administration partnered with them in operations during the war in Afghanistan. Despite current tensions between the two superpowers, we still rely heavily on Chinese goods, and our support of China and capitalist influence in years past has empowered them and made them Asia's most powerful country, while the US is squeezed out of the Middle East, a key battleground between us and China. It was heavily debated what the US's stance on China should be in the 60s and 70s, while diplomacy was later used to warm relations between the US and PRC. The debate and diplomacy that started in the late 60s has shaped our relationship with the People's Republic of China, and will continue to do so for generations to come.